Hi, everyone. I'm Jen, the editor-in-chief of Busted Halo, and I am here with Father Dave Dwyer. Hey, Father Dave.
Hey Jen,
How
how's
you
it going
doing?
today?
Not too bad. It's a little rainy and dreary out, but we have Facebook Live to lift us up. How are you?
I just want to create my own sun here. Oh, you know what, Jen, I should do?
You probably could.
Yeah, since it's so rainy outside, I want to do a different something fun for about. Oh, how about that? That's nice.
Oh,
Oh,
that's
that
so
makes us
peaceful.
think that it's not raining out.
Exactly. It's so peaceful and calming. You probably have Mary in the background there, if I
There's,
recognize that correctly. There
there's,
she is.
there's
There
Mary.
she is.
Now, usually
Oh,
there's not a big microphone overwhelming Mary.
that is true. That is true. But one of my favorite visuals there at St. Mary's of the Lake.
Yes, Lake George, New York. I've spent
Yeah.
some time up there. Boy, Jen, there's been some news stories popping around about Paulist fathers and seminarians on St. Mary's of the Lake up at Lake George.
There sure are. I have certainly shared them, but you should tell our Facebook Live viewers what's happening.
Well, oh my gosh, I can't believe the different news sources that have picked this up. This is like 3 weeks ago this happened, but for some reason over Labor Day
It's
week,
going
Labor Day
viral.
weekend, it was a viral thing. So our couple of our priests and seminarians and novices, so those that are in formation, the younger guys, we're up at Lake George for a good part of the summer. And towards the end of the summer, this guy that owns a tiki boat ride that float a boat around Lake George. He offered to give us a little free ride, and they don't sell liquor. You got to bring if you want to bring soda or beer, or you bring it along yourself. And I wasn't there, so I think they just went out for a ride in the afternoon. It wasn't like a Friday night party, but it was probably a good 10 of our folks. And then during the course of the ride, they notice that there's an overturned kayak and a guy who's kind of like looking like he's in trouble and splashing, and he maneuvers the tiki boat over there. And some of our seminarians say, do you need some help? Would you like us to, scoop you out of there? And he said, absolutely. He felt like he was going to drown. He had lost his life jacket wasn't doing the trick, and he was kind of floundering. And so this big news story, of course, is that priests in a tiki boat save drowning kayaker. The couple of the ironies of the story: he's an addiction counselor. He's been sober for 7 years, and he finds it funny that he was saved by a floating bar,
Right.
essentially. And one of our novices at the time, he's now a seminarian, one of our novices at the time, his name is Noah. So a lot of the news services was like, Noah in boat saves drowning man.
Oh man.
I just heard at lunch today, Jen, I don't know if you've even heard this, but this weekend, our novices, the three novices, well, they were novices then, they just made their first profession. So they're seminarians now, but this happened 3 weeks ago. So the three of them, there was more on the boat, but for some reason they want to talk to these guys. They were the ones that kind of chiefly, the youngest ones, they were the ones that chiefly like reached over the side and hoisted this guy on board. They're going to be on NPR's Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me
Stop.
this weekend.
That's
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
exciting. Oh my
I
gosh.
know, it's crazy, all this publicity that they're getting.
That is so exciting. I mean, it really was divine intervention. I
Yep.
mean, how
Yep.
how often do you get saved by a bunch of priests on a floating tiki
Right.
bar?
Right.
Oh, what a great story. We'll be sharing more on that story on our social media accounts if you follow
Oh,
us on Busted Halo.
indeed.
Indeed. But for the purposes of right now, we're answering your questions of faith. So if you have a question of faith for Father Dave, you can type it in the comment section below this video. And remember to like and share this video so more folks will see it. Oh, we have a good a literal Fisher of Men quip from
Right.
one of our from one of our commenters, Anthony. We're on the same page,
Yep.
Anthony. We're on the
Yep.
same page.
Oh, believe me, I've seen all the various different news sources that pick this up. All the different puns with like
Oh, I
Noah
love a
and then
pun. I love a
fishers
pun.
of men. Yeah,
So know that all of these are delighting me very much.
they are.
So ask us your questions of faith in the comment section below, and we will answer them live now. So how about we get started, Father Dave? What do you think?
I love the idea of getting started.
Good. I'm so
Mhm.
glad.
Mhm.
So our first question comes from Mark. And Mark has a COVID related question
Okay,
specific
that's still
to,
going
I
on.
know it's still happening, still a
Good
thing.
Lord.
So Mark says, I'm looking to train to be a Eucharistic minister, but
Oh,
in
great.
this time of COVID, no real training opportunities are available.
Hmm. Hmm.
Many parish ministers have been told not to visit church members due to governmental guidelines. Can you provide me information so I can train myself to do this vital task?
Oh, okay. First of all, not really a self-training situation. So what he's saying is, apparently, I mean, obviously this might vary a little bit throughout our listening and viewing area, with different parishes or bishops having different policies about what Eucharistic ministers are doing, or even if they're training new people. But apparently, in Mark's area, doesn't sound like they're training a lot of new people. He didn't say definitively that they're not. He just says, well, no real training opportunities are available, is what he's saying. So I'm going to take that to mean that the parish is saying, yeah, we're not really doing that right now. For one thing, we'd have to do that in person. We'd have to show you how to touch things and all that. And well, we're really scaling back on all that right now. I will concur with Mark that it is a vital ministry to bring communion to those who desire it, who can't make it to church. But Mark, unfortunately, I'm going to give you a rough lesson that a lot of us faithful learned at some point, is that the church is not a kind of a do-it-yourself, and we do work on a hierarchical pyramid. And so if you are told by the people that have the legitimate authority over you, and that would be your pastor and your bishop, that we're not training people right now, you don't go and do it yourself. Sorry. That's how that works. And in fact, the term that we use is an extraordinary minister of Holy Communion, because the ordinary ministers of Holy Communion, whether it be at Mass or even visiting people that are in hospitals or homebound, the ordinary ministers are the ordained priests and deacons. And during this time of COVID, while it is made for very busy and oftentimes very challenging going up against state and civil regulations about whether or not you can visit people or be in the same room or wear a mask and all that, it's been very challenging during this time. Those who are those ordinary ministers have largely been taking on the bulk of this role. But when I go back to the term extraordinary ministers, that means you are essentially deputized by the ordinary minister, by the priest. In this case would be the pastor. Some cases perhaps a bishop, but that's usually not in the case of lay people who are extraordinary ministers of Holy Communion. There's not like a diocesan core. It's usually, almost always, based through a parish. And that goes back to the fundamental building blocks of how our church is structured and designed, and how the canon law of our church is set up, that the principal agent of the church is the parish, and the diocese serves certain purposes, but we always start with what we call the principle of subsidiarity. And that means, certainly in canon law of the Catholic Church, as it does similarly in civil law, it means that you start with the most local way in which you can do any sort of task, and that's the best and that's closest to the people and the people that know about that. So in other words, you don't write to the Pope if you don't like the song that your organist picked for Mass. You deal with that locally. Jesus even says that in the Bible. He says, if you got an issue with somebody, talk to them first, and then you can kind of widen it out. So in your case, it may sound like you're doing that. You're like, well, they're not going to train me at my parish. So how do I kick this upstairs? We're used to sort of doing that in the rest of life. If we don't get the answer that we want from the customer service rep, we say, can I talk to your supervisor? In the church, it doesn't really work that way. So you cannot be deputized as an extraordinary minister of Holy Communion by the ordinary minister if the ordinary minister doesn't want to do that right now. And I would say for legitimate reasons. In the same reason that, if, for instance, if they're not allowing the priests and deacons and maybe the other already trained Eucharistic ministers to go visit people in hospitals and bring them communion, then what makes you think that they're going to allow you to do that? Now, what you may be saying is they need a lot of help right now, and there's not enough people to do it, and I'd like to volunteer to help. And that's great. And I want to encourage that spirit in you that desires to do that. But our individual spirit, however we want to sort of define that, is always working in concert with and under the authority of the legitimate authorities of the structure of the church. And in this case, if the pastor says we're not training any new Eucharistic ministers, well, I mean, I suppose, Mark, you could go down the street and join a different parish, but you can't just go to Busted Halo online and train yourself and then show up at the hospital and say, I'm a Eucharistic minister, because it just doesn't work that way. So, but thank you for your passion and your desire. And I hope that soon, oh, please, Lord, soon, We'll be on the other side of this, where we can begin training Eucharistic ministers again. We can begin utilizing Eucharistic ministers not only at Mass, but also visiting people who need and genuinely desire to receive communion, receive the Eucharist at their home or in a hospital situation. You're right that we need all that. It is a vital ministry. But the same could be said about having Mass in church, and that too is for whether or not you and I individually might think there are legitimate reasons. We're not having everybody in Mass at church, and we're not visiting everybody in the hospital that we need to, because of what is deemed to be the greater good of not spreading this virus. And sometimes seeing the forest for the trees is hard. We'd rather take care of the thing that's right in front of our face rather than look at the big picture. The big picture that most of the bishops agree with. Now, there's a few, obviously, where we're sort of butting heads with civil society. Notable example in recent weeks is the Archdiocese of San Francisco, where the legal authorities have said not only can you not have Mass inside, but even if you have Mass outside, you can only have 12 people. Well, to me, that's crazy. And what if you have a big, huge parking lot? I mean, why would it be limited to 12 people? So while there are a few examples of legitimate disagreements between church and state, overall, mostly the bishops of all of our dioceses where we're broadcasting to are in general agreement with the civil authorities in terms of limiting the number of people that are inside. I mean, what we've learned over the last 6 months, and we didn't know what we didn't know at the beginning of this whole coronavirus pandemic, in fact. What we've learned is that the highest incidence of spreading the virus and turning into like a super spreader event is almost exactly the definition of going to church. It's indoors. It's with a lot of people that typically would sit close to each other, where they're, projecting things out of their mouth, whether it's singing or saying amen. I mean, similar to sporting events in arenas. So those two, no time soon are we going to, if you've been tuning into like the NBA playoffs, you see like little animated, screens where the stands used to be, and they're sweetening it with fakey applause. Well, that's how they're dealing with that. We can't just have, sort of fake sweetened amens. We would rather be there. And yet, for the big picture, the legitimate reason of hopefully in the long term, not having this pandemic get worse than it is, and not having people that are indeed more vulnerable than some other people be affected more severely, we as church overall, notwithstanding a few exceptions I was talking about, we as church have agreed with the local authorities to limit these various actions. So again, I mean, the hard lesson, Mark, that, probably a lot of us butt up against at some point in our faith life is that something that I want to do is not necessarily what the church wants me to do. And unfortunately, that's the case here. So I'm afraid you'll have to be patient. That's a great virtue, and it'll be a great virtue when eventually you do become an extraordinary minister of Holy Communion, being patient with the people of God. If you're visiting somebody in a hospital and it takes a long time to get through security, patience is a good virtue. So for right now, it's being patient until such time as your local pastor deems that it is again, appropriate to start training new Eucharistic ministers and having them fill that role. So for now, sorry that that's not better news for you.
Well, thank you very much for your question, Mark. And thank you to all of you who are writing in with great questions right now. We're answering your questions of faith. If you're just joining us right now, type your question in the comments section below. And remember to like and share this video so more folks can see it. So we have a bunch of questions coming in. I know, Father Dave, that the election is something that is on a lot of our minds right now.
Is there an election coming up? I haven't
yes.
gotten the alert.
As if 2020 wasn't busy enough. There is an election coming up. So we have a question from Deborah. Deborah says, Father Dave, please share some insights for voting in the national election.
Oh, just go with insights, Father Dave?
Go with insights.
Go with insights. Well, Jen, as a matter of fact, this is one of these occasions where I can enlist the assistance not only of you as editor-in-chief, but in general of the broader Busted Halo universe. We've got a lot of good resources that are up on our site, and we can even point you to some others that are provided. What are some good examples, Jen?
Sure. Some good examples. We have a voting Catholic video. Our voting Catholic video, which we will share in the comments section of this, highlights some guidance based on the USCCB's Forming Catholics for Faithful Citizenship. Did I say that correctly, Father Dave?
Indeed, forming consciences for faithful citizenship. That's right.
Yes.
That's
So
what it's called.
based on that from the USCCB, we highlight some aspects of Catholic social teaching for you to keep in mind as you head to the polls. So you can check out that video. We also have a couple of podcasts today, or a couple of 2 days ago on Busted Halo. We shared a podcast from a recent radio segment of yours, Father Dave, where you answer a question about dealing with the polarization that's happening in our country right now. And then we have another podcast which we reposted, which was from the last election. It's been very popular, and I see that we actually even have a question that relates to that podcast that's coming in now.
Wow,
And
lots of things.
that podcast is called "Can a Priest Tell Me Who to Vote For?"
Can a priest tell me who to vote for? The short answer is no. But check out the podcast.
Check out the podcast.
No, I mean, and there will be obviously a lot more discussion. The original document, we always want to, in the Catholic Church, we want to go back to our primary sources. And what, as Jen was talking about, our video that we have on bustedhalo.com, the coming directly from the mouth of the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, we'll also put a link to that original document, which is called Forming Consciences for Faithful Citizenship. And forming one's conscience is like forming anything else, like being on a workout regimen for 6 months or several years, or an Olympic athlete training for years and years to perfect their craft and hone their body. Forming a conscience is not like looking at a headline and going, I guess I picked this person. And it does take effort and work on our part. And yet, if it were the case that the Catholic Church could merely say, just like some large publications or other major organizations, that after kind of doing their own work as an organization, they in some sense make it easy for people that follow that organization, and they say, we've endorsed this candidate. So if you're a follower of whatever newspaper or whatever union or other organization, and that organization endorses a candidate, maybe you go, well, I didn't do a lot of the research, but I guess if they say that candidate's good, I'm going to go with that candidate. The Catholic Church does not do that. That is not to say, as I see some comments coming in, that there aren't individuals who represent the Catholic Church, even with a collar on, that might go as far as to an endorsing candidate. But we officially do not do that. And not just because we're like worried about our tax exempt status. It is about forming people's consciences. And the reality is, just simply stated, that if there were in our essentially two-party system, yes, it's not only two parties, but I mean, for all intents and purposes, for the last 100 years or more, our two-party system here in the United States, if there were a third party that had candidates that absolutely towed the line of Catholic teaching from soup to nuts and were faithful Catholics and embraced everything that we believe about morality and social justice and our place in the world, then maybe you could imagine in that kind of a scenario that a Catholic Church could say, yeah, we endorse this whole party and whatever candidates are a part of that. But there's not. And neither of our major two parties, we can easily point to examples on both sides where they don't fit squarely into our Catholic teaching. So that means that puts it on us as individual Catholics to form our consciences about the important issues. And some issues are more important than others. And it's not just kind of a complete toss-up, even though we see year after year and every 4-year cycle, we see certainly in the general election that it seems like roughly within a few percentage points that Catholics are kind of split between our two major parties. And the church would certainly have very strong opinions that not all issues are the same. So it's not just like, well, this party's good on this and this party's good on that, so it's kind of a wash, so I guess I can pick whoever I want. No, forming your conscience for faithful citizenship does mean taking into account and weighing with its appropriate due what the church teaches on a whole panoply of issues, which is why they have documents like Forming Consciences for Faithful Citizenship. Like you don't click on that, open it up, and they go Biden or Trump. No, it gives you all of these ways in which we should prayerfully enter into discernment, which is quite frankly, a more complicated process than merely, well, I've always had a donkey or I've always had an elephant, and I guess that's what I'm going with. To truly form our consciences is a spiritual task and a civic responsibility. So that's why this time of year, we Catholics have a little bit of work to do.
All right. Well, thank you very much for that question, Deborah. We're getting a lot of questions in right now, Father Dave. um,
I love it when we do. It's a constant influx of the questions.
there are a lot of creative ones.
Good.
Um, let's see. I'm interested in this one because
Okay.
I've heard this before too. So I actually just missed getting her name. I think this comes from Linda, but she says we are selling our house, and I've heard about buying a Saint Joseph kit at the Catholic store that you bury in the yard and ask for his intercession. My husband does not think this sounds like something the church would approve of. I told Father Dave I'd ask what he thinks.
Well, it depends on what he means by the church approving of it. I mean, that the church has advocated it for many years. So in a sense,
Yeah.
yes.
I know a
Has it
lot of
ever been,
people who have done this.
right. Has it ever been in a papal encyclical, or is it in the catechism or canon law? No. But certainly it is a very common Catholic process that's never been forbidden or prohibited by the church. And you can look at it this way. Certainly, would we think there's anything wrong for asking for a saint's intercession for anything, for a job interview, for selling our home, for our grandmother to be healed of what it is that she's struggling with in the hospital? Of course not. We believe that's one of the roles that the saints are there for. And if we put together another piece, are there some instances where a devotion to a particular saint involves something like what we call a sacramental? So not the seven sacraments, not the big seven, but sacramental with a small s are ways in which we go beyond just the ethereal or the theoretical, or even if you might call it the spiritual in the heart, and we go to a human tangible experience of whatever that is. A great example, of course, would be our Blessed Mother and the Rosary. You know, is the Rosary superstitious because it's like beads, and that might be similar to other religions or other philosophies that would use some sort of a mantra or hand beads? No, we believe it's a valid form of devotion to Mary. So one could certainly think of other sacramentals like that that are connected to particular saints. Is it superstitious to ask St. Anthony to find my car keys, or is it a genuine interacting with the saints that are the cloud of witnesses in heaven above us? Well, I mean, I suppose there are some ways in which we can be about almost anything in our faith. We can be superstitious about it, or we can kind of cross over into some superstition. But that doesn't mean that something that could genuinely be a sincere devotion necessarily on its face is superstitious. Now, obviously, once you get into a few ingredients, like for instance, this kit that we're talking about, is it Matthew who's asking about? Oh, Lisa. Lisa asked about the St. Joseph kit that you bury in the backyard. I mean, I can certainly hear some people saying, well, it's one thing to pray to St. Joseph, who was the foster father of Jesus, he's the patron saint of the church, which is our spiritual home. You can see kind of all the logical connections there. It's one thing to pray to St. Joseph and say, St. Joseph, we ask for your intercession. Please help us sell our house. But for some people, it might be going a bridge too far to go, here's the kit, and when you get it, it's a statue, and you have to bury it upside down, not like, sideways, and you have to like bury it, not just put it in the yard, and you can't just think about it. Well, I can see how some people might either think that is, or in some people's actual usage of it or dealing with it, it might stray into superstition. But in general, it would fall under the category of devotions of the church. I know people that have prayed 54-day novenas who are single people looking for a husband, and it so happened that 54-day novena worked and they got married to that person. So, I mean, you say, well, that's kind of just luck or coincidental, or that superstition. Well, there are so many things of our faith that are just really out of the realm of us actually logically proving or arguing, that the line between what is faith and devotion and what might be silly or superstitious is not a definitively Sharpie black line that we cross over it here and we're on the other side of it here. And even for different people, things can move into the realm of superstition in a different way or a different pace than that very same devotion might be with somebody else or in another culture. So no, the church does not condemn the practice of buying a St. Joseph kit from a Catholic supply store. I mean, if it was really condemned by the church, the Catholic supply store wouldn't be selling you a St. Joseph kit. I would say that some people would probably find that a more helpful or uplifting devotion than other people. Some people might find it silly and would rather just kind of every night include St. Joseph in their prayers before they go to bed, asking for his intercession to sell their house. But again, as Catholics, we are a tangible people. There are plenty of Christians that would say that many of the things that we do, not even something that can be almost easily looked at as superstition, like burying a statue upside down, or something that seems mantra-esque or similar to other pagan religions like beads and praying the rosary, other ways in which we even have depictions of saints in stained glass and statues. There'd be plenty of Christians that would say, no, don't do any of that. They would even point to the commandments. We would certainly have a different interpretation about the commandments and what it means to have an idol. But I mean, many would say, no, just Christianity is it's here in the heart and it's in the head. You don't need all this stuff, all these things you guys have, all these outfits and the things on the windows and all these statues. And as Catholics, we would say, we believe that the fact that God, who is obviously transcendent and beyond all of the stuff, chose in his own divine wisdom to inhabit our limited, feeble human bodies in the incarnation, that makes Christianity an incarnational faith, not one that is merely in the head or even in the heart, if you want to talk about the spiritual sense, but that it is actually physically embodied. So that's why sacraments, the big seven, are very important to us, as are sacramentals. Now, obviously, once you get away from the big seven sacraments and you move down that line of, well, what's a sacramental? Is dipping my hand in holy water, using a rosary? Some things can be obvious. Could we stretch that definition of what a sacramental is to something that in certain cultures might be somewhat superstitious? Yes. Do we think it's worth that risk of occasionally those things going overboard or too far? Because the other option would be throwing out the baby with the bathwater and going with, again, like a lot of other Christian traditions would say, all of this stuff is human, and it's, sometimes they would even say from the devil or worshiping idols. And we would say, absolutely not. Not you don't just look at one commandment and interpret that in one way in the Old Testament. You look at the entire gift of God in Jesus and in Christianity and say, this is incarnational. God took on all of these human, Jesus got a cold. Jesus stubbed his toe. He inhabited our humanness. And therefore, it's important to us to live our faith, but also to come in contact with the divinity of God through this humanity that Jesus took on, which means our senses, which means using water poured at baptism. It means consuming the bread of life in the Eucharist. And it does mean sometimes holding rosary beads in your hand, and it sometimes means burying a statue of St. Joseph upside down in your backyard if you want to sell your house. So I would say that fits into our, not only the devotional tradition of the church, but also the fact that sacramentality there's something more there for us than merely getting on our knees and closing our eyes and say, St. Joseph, help me sell my house. There's nothing wrong with that. And that's not limited or imperfect. But we would say our human experience of what our faith is augmented and benefited, and that we do somehow come in contact with the divine in a different way when we incarnationally experience God through our senses in these sacraments and sacramentals. So nothing wrong, Lisa, with getting the old kit from the Catholic supply store, burying it upside down in the ground. Now, if the new owners are going to be putting in like underground sprinklers, you may want to tell them, well, we got a statue.
Give 'em a heads up.
A little heads up. There's a statue buried out there.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Lisa, and good luck with the selling process. We hope it goes very well. Thank you all for your questions. There are so many great ones coming in. All right, let's answer this question from Jessica, Father Dave.
Jessica.
So Jessica says, I
Okay.
have been a cradle Catholic my entire life. Over the years, I have grown away from the church. I want to get back into my faith in the church. Where should I begin? I also feel as though I've forgotten many of the teachings of the church, seeking direction to get back where I used to be.
Huh. I see. Seeking direction. Re-guide the faith. Jessica, there's several ways to go about it. I would say, so the way she described it, I've grown away from the church. I'm going to assume that at the very least would include not regular participation in the sacraments. And so the best step one for anybody in your situation, there might be several other steps, but the best step one is celebrating the sacrament of reconciliation. And isn't that beautiful that that's one of the terms that we use to describe the sacrament? I was just talking about sacraments for a few minutes and how important they are for us experiencing the grace of God. So reconciliation is kind of a homecoming, a return, a rejoining, a reconnecting, a making it hold once again. That sacrament of reconciliation is the perfect place to start. Now, after that, many people, after celebrating the sacrament, because we believe it does impart to us divine grace, some people may feel, whew, that feels great. Feels like I'm home again. And just like, hopping on a bike that you haven't ridden for a while, or seeing an old friend that you haven't talked to in years, but just when you sit down and have a cup of coffee, you reconnect and it just feels like no time has passed. For some people, that's enough, and they feel like they're home again. For other people, would like a bit more of a process. One of the things that you mentioned, Jessica, is not uncommon, that when we've been away from the faith, we also feel like we've forgotten some of it, either the how-tos or even the why or the theology or what it is we believe and all that sort of thing. So there are certain programs, and Jen, I bet we could muster up a few links that we could put in the comments, don't you think?
I'm sure we can.
There are some programs. One, my own community, the Paul's Fathers, developed a program for returning Catholics, started in the early 1970s, called Landings, and the idea behind the name is that it's when you've been out at sea and you kind of are looking for the harbor to pull back into and come home. It's a safe place to land. Landing is the model is a bit more of a almost like a support group where other people that have been in a similar situation, who themselves at some time in their life had been away from the church for whatever reason. Sometimes people drift away. Sometimes people have what they believe is cause, and they intentionally step away, and then now have been reconciled to the church. So Landing is one model. There's a program called Remembering Church, like capital M, remembering, like you're remembering church, but you're also bringing the members back to the church. And honestly, it would depend largely on what is offered in your local situation at your local parish. But there's also some good, Catholics Come Home is a good website to start with, because it not only is sort of welcoming, but it also has some of the resources that you're talking about. One thing that I know that a lot of people do, Jessica, in a situation like yours, again, if you don't feel like you need 12 weeks of a support group or to kind of work things out or whatever, and you don't necessarily need some sort of a ritual, because some of these welcome back or returning Catholic programs culminate in something. Again, the church doesn't need it, doesn't require it. The only thing that really is required is for you to celebrate the sacrament of reconciliation. Unless, I mean, you don't mention this, Jessica, but like if, for instance, you'd gone to seminary and been ordained a minister in a different church, or you'd made some really official proclamation of rejecting your Catholic bishop and made some sort of open profession that you joined another church. In that case, the more formal the exiting of the church is, the more formal the return logically needs to be. But in your case, I mean, you say grown away from, and I'd say in 90% of the cases, that's what happens, and folks drift away. So if that's the case, nothing more is required. But some people, for the same reason that I was just talking about in that last question, some people want to feel something more than just like, well, I just want to go back and sit down in the same pew again. I mean, it feels wrong to do that after 5 years or 20 years or whatever it is. So there are some of these programs that would involve something that might even be, standing up in front of the congregation and once again professing faith and having people go, welcome home. Some people wouldn't want the attention on them like that. So because it varies greatly with the individual, there's a good amount of options. But one of the things I was going to suggest, because one of the things you asked about is, I feel I've forgotten the teachings of the church. What would be a way to kind of bone up again? Well, Jen, I suppose I'd be remiss if I didn't slightly pat ourselves on the back and say that I'd say bustedhalo.com has a lot of great resources.
We
Some
sure
examples,
do.
Jen?
Thank
Maybe
you for that
videos?
promotion. You can check out our sacraments videos. You can check out a lot of our videos, and we have some resources as well for taking you through the Mass if you need a little refresher on the parts of the Mass, our guide to confession, lots of things that will help you on your journey back to the faith.
And another great way that is more local. Obviously, we're a website, and there's not a physical person you can touch. Not that you're not allowed to touch anybody right now, anyway. But something that is more sort of in person, and maybe even a bit more incarnational, based on what I was saying before, is that some people find a value in being a part of some program at their church whether it's education of young people or it's adults who are in an adult confirmation class, or the RCIA, which is the program for adults who are coming into the church for the first time. And you may think, Jessica, well, I mean, I don't feel like I could be like teaching somebody. Well, you don't have to teach, but one of the roles that is an opportunity I find for someone like you that so many people have told me has been very valuable is to be a sponsor for somebody. Now, being a sponsor doesn't mean you have to have a master's in theology and every week meet with them and impart the faith to them. You kind of like show up with them to the classes and you sit near them or you sit next to them. And in many ways, you get to learn / relearn anything about the Catholic Church that might have slipped away over the years. And a lot of people find that a very valuable tool, particularly in a situation like you're in, returning to the church, a valuable way to kind of re-educate myself. Catechize is the fancy word we would use in the church, to be re-catechized, and at the same time being of service to someone else. Some people might say, well, gee, I've been away for a long time. I don't feel right about sort of sponsoring someone else or saying that I have such a great faith. Don't look at it as that you need to be the Pope or Mother Teresa. You're merely a peer in the same way. I mean, I'll use an analogy that maybe limps a little bit, but like in 12-step programs, everybody has a sponsor. Now, that sponsor doesn't claim to be the most perfect person in the world or the person who wrote all the books on how to get sober, but it's just like another person who's kind of been through that and has struggled themselves. So if you look at it more like that, more like a companion or a peer, then it would maybe be a little less intimidating, and I think you would benefit greatly from it, Jessica.
Thank you very much for your question, Jessica. We'll be praying for you on your journey back to the faith. Father Dave, this has flown by.
Oh my gosh, what's happened? Once again, flying.
We've been going for 35 minutes already.
Oh, well.
We're just about out of time.
We are.
That's sad. Well, we thank all of you for your great questions today. Know that even though we didn't get to your question today, that doesn't mean that we won't. We take these and Father Dave answers some of them on the radio show. And we also carry these questions over to our future Facebook Live broadcasts, which you can look forward to tuning into as well. But we see all of your great questions and we have them recorded and we will get to them. So a few things to note on bustedhalo.com this week. We mentioned some of our resources already in terms of political podcasts about dealing with political division in the church, and also our podcast about Can a Priest Tell Me Who to Vote For? Those are both up on bustedhalo.com. And while you're navigating through the site, there are some lovely essays that we have this week as well, including one about overcoming judginess. I'm sure we've all been in positions on social media or whatnot where we are quick to have a reaction to somebody sharing something that we might find unsavory. And this is a nice reflection on coming to terms with a more Christian response. So I would invite you all to take a look at that. And as always, feel free to suggest ideas and themes for our next Facebook Live. But we appreciate you spending the time with us today.
Thank you, and we'll see you next time right here on the Facebook Live. Maybe, Jen, I'll do it might be a more autumnal background.
Oh, we can't hear you, Father Dave.
Sorry. Jen, next time, Jen, there might be a more autumnal background.
Yeah, I know. It's almost fall. I can't even believe it.
It's almost fall. So.
Yeah, almost fall. But thank you all for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you next time.